To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to Business Today Conclave. Today I am joined by none other than MD and CEO for Invest India, Mr. Deepak Bagla, who of course has been the pioneer in the India's sector of FDIs and giving constant good remarks about how the economy can eventually grow by eventually focusing on FDIs and other technology, especially digital. Thank you, Mr. Bagla, for joining us. Please tell us what's the scenario for FDI sector in India? How the response been post-pandemic and pre-pandemic? Any comments on that?
Thank you, Chetan. Pleasure to be with you. Most brutal time in the past 24 months, right? It's really been tough, and not just for us, but across the globe. And in fact, this was a time when global FDI decreased by over 35%. I would say the only 2 or 3 countries in the world where FDI actually increased, and in the Indian case, the highest, which is over 10%, happened in March 2021. And remember, as I said, in the midst of the most unprecedented lockdown in human history. We had an FDI of over $81 billion, the highest ever we've got in our history. But what's more interesting out of that $81 billion, it came from 89 countries. 89 countries today across the globe trust India and have their faith in India, not just in India's opportunity, but also in the ability of India's leadership to take the policy decisions which will make their investments profitable and viable. The other interesting thing, it came across 63 sectors.
Okay, oh wow.
The India opportunity today is unprecedented. I've always been saying that it's a transformation which has never ever happened in human history before, both in terms of the scale and the pace at which this change is happening. And 63 sectors is just a reflection of how this transformation is happening right across the country,
right,
in every aspect of our existence. And that presents an amazing opportunity, which also explains to a point where you're seeing the high numbers come in.
89, I'm sorry I'm interjecting you, but 89 countries you mentioned and above 60 sectors.
63 sectors.
63 sectors. Which all sectors are most favorite for India for investment? Is it the FMCG sector? Is it the building, the industry sector, the construction sector, the highway sector? Where all are you seeing the most growth?
So both ways. I think we're seeing across all sectors, but I will come back to that point. The last point on that one, and the most interesting, investment this time has come into 29 states and union territories. You know, if I had looked at this pie chart even 5 or 10 years ago, it would have been sort of confined to the same old 7 to 10 states. The moment you are seeing 29 states and union territories where this is happening, shows how it is now getting broad-based. And the new India which is coming up is now going to be bottom-up and not just top-down. Coming back to those 63 sectors, if I look at it from a check size, then obviously things like infrastructure, petrochemicals, they would obviously be on the larger side. But there are new upcoming sectors where India is taking an enormous lead across the world. For example, 40% of all investment we've received in data storage happened last year in the midst of the lockdown.
The entire 40% of the
Of
entire
our
history.
In our data storage, all investment which came, 40% came just last year. The interesting element, Chetan, here is these new sectors coming up are the ones which are now going to grow much faster because their rate of growth is fast. And these are also defining the new pillars of growth of New India because a large number of them are based on innovation and startup. And I think that is a remarkable story because that is what is the engine of growth which is taking it forward across all sectors. I mean, think about it. The first green industrial revolution in the world is being introduced by India.
Green Revolution, when you mentioned Green Revolution.
What I mean is,
exactly?
Look at the other industrial revolutions. When they moved from wood to coal, that was not green at all.
Right.
And that's where you saw the power balance shifting from one continent to another. Then you had from coal to oil, again you had said, that was also not green. The first time you're seeing a manufacturing revolution take place, which is happening in India now, is based on green energy. We are one of the biggest green energy focused countries in the world today. And the interesting thing is, it is being led right from the top. And that leadership has given it direction. That leadership has created a policy and an ecosystem where it is not just an objective, but you're actually seeing it being executed. I mean, think about it. You were the only G20 country to have met its milestone.
Absolutely.
And even now, if you look at it, the fastest rate of growth in renewables, be it solar or wind, is happening in the Indian context.
But if I may, you please allow me, the government recently announced the roadmap for the National Hydrogen Mission. I've extensively reported on the hydrogen sector, renewable energy, electric vehicles. These are 3-4 key areas that would eventually help India in reducing its target of by 2070, the carbon zero emissions. So, except these 3-4 sectors that we usually talk about, like the hydrogen sector, the renewable energy sector that you just mentioned, any other sector that you feel would play a larger role than these 3-4 typical sectors?
You know, Chetan, a green revolution is not just about a few handful of sectors.
Correct.
It's about a lifestyle and it's about a mindset. There's a state in India where 10% of the funds given to every panchayat has to be spent on green energy.
Oh.
Or green related energy.
Where is it?
Objectives. So, you know, when you're looking at these new elements which are coming on, it's every individual, every citizen. And it is, as I always say, it is ground up. It is a bottom up which is happening. And that is the result where you're seeing execution happen before the timelines and we're meeting it. For example, when we talk of the solar energy and the renewable, there was a 175.
Correct.
There was a lot of apprehension at that point of
The
time.
industry was very apprehensive at that time, yes.
And you've seen that now it is happening. Similarly, you're seeing that it is not just a plan. It is an execution which is beating the timelines consistently wherever it is happening. So it is a plan in execution which is impact oriented with clear definitions to it. And that is what is giving everyone that comfort, where how fast we are moving into an industrial phase, into a huge manufacturing phase. Because mind you, when I spoke about this 81 billion, this is manufacturing FDI. This is not FPI. And to my mind, this is just the beginning. We are turning around at the bottom end of the hockey stick and ready to take on that vertical.
Okay. So probably when you talk about the end of the hockey stick, it indicates a U-turn, a U-shaped recovery for the economy.
So I'm not just talking of the economy. I'm talking of our position
Correct.
as an opportunity
Absolutely.
of the seat. We've turned around the corner. And the story has just begun where India is concerned. And that's when I say this is the most critical inflection point where we are seeing and ready for that vertical takeoff to be happening. The momentum is being created. Now let's step back on this. You asked me about the pandemic. Before we went into the pandemic, we were the fastest growing large economy on the planet. The most interesting thing is that one of the most complex challenges, both on life and livelihood, was managed by a government in an extremely effective manner to the point where by all indications, be it the IMF, the multilaterals or the others, we are still the fastest growing large economy. And as we move beyond this pandemic, to be able to take back that position of being the fastest growing large economy. So this $3 trillion GDP today is all set to hit that $10 trillion number by the end of this decade.
Right. I take your point that by 2030, if we assume that a $10 trillion economy would be achieved, I would now, before I wrap up my interview with you, I would just like to know how this $10 trillion economy dream would be achieved and what role would Invest India play? Because as far as I remember Invest India, I've keenly watched how you have driven the growth story for India and attracting investments into India. What's next at Invest India now? The FDI is good, things are coming up, inflation is a bit troublesome for the economy, yes, but what's next at Invest India?
You know, let me just give you a quick one on Invest India. We've got 4 verticals.
Right.
The first one is investment promotion and facilitation, where we work closely with an investor on their business plan and showing them the India opportunity, getting them the location, getting them all government approvals, and getting them actually executed, that plant which is happening, and then to hold them right through their journey in India. The second is Startup India. We are the execution arm for Startup India, and that, to my mind, is a fascinating story. It is actually a story which is now being picked up by business schools across the globe on how efficient policy making by involving all stakeholders and creating clear milestones on implementation can show you the results. I mean, It was launched
In fact,
on
I think
60.
it's also become a case study for a lot of students, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right, Chetan. Across business schools across the world. Let me give you a quick example. January 16, 2016 is when the Honorable Prime Minister
Right.
launched Startup India.
Right.
So we are what, about 60 months down the line? 70 months? In 70 months, you're number 3 in the world in number of unicorns. In fact, in 2020, you added a unicorn every 30 days. 21, you added a unicorn every 10 days. 22, you're adding a unicorn every 7 days. You're number 2 in the world in number of startups, and you're number 1 in the world with new startups adding every day. It's an entire ecosystem which has now gathered a momentum, which is now taking it on. But the most interesting part of the startup business, of the 739 odd districts of India, today I have a registered startup in over 630 districts of India. There are 2 interesting elements coming out of that. One is, as I said, the engine of growth of New India has moved beyond the 5 or 7 or 11 metro centers to the small towns and villages of India.
So the tier 2, tier 3 cities are actively participating in
Absolutely.
their entrepreneurial venture.
But more interestingly, you see the challenge statements and the challenge solutions which are coming out from these small towns and cities are ones which impact not just the top 500 million of the world's population, but the bottom 6.5 billion of it.
This all the larger picture problems, basically.
And that is what is the interesting thing about our ecosystem, that the diversity of solutions which are coming up, which are frugal, which are easily scalable, easily implementable, that is the strength of India. The third part is the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Initiative. All innovation happening in the public and the private space, joining the dots, taking it to commercialization. And very interesting things are happening there, where we are trying to see how we are bringing in the latest innovations and technology into different departments of the government of India, and including the defense forces, including a Delhi police, for example. Very interesting activity happening there. And the last part, how we are digitizing the entire investor journey. From starting to show them the opportunity by coming on our website, to create a single application on the national single window so they don't need to go around and meet officials and it be cleared, to be able to see a host of projects where they can invest in on the India investment grid. In fact, it's one of the most visited websites today in the world from the Indian context. We have over 100 countries visiting it on a regular basis, to the point where some of these marquee projects are monitored at the senior most level in the government to see that their execution is on time.
How much time does a startup take from the stage of ideation to a full-fledged registered startup with the government of India? Is there any timeline that the government follows, or just for the viewers? We know, as you and me know about it, but for the viewer, if any possible entrepreneur is watching you right now, how encouraged should he be to start his own venture, and this much time he knows that it would take him to start his own venture?
Totally dependent on the entrepreneur themselves. And that is the strength of India. Their ability to push through an idea when it is required. And we are there to handhold them, to walk them through that idea, to get them all the approvals, and to help it come into a business existence. That is what startup does. And by the way, the Startup Hub, which is you can access through our website, is now the world's largest startup hub. And it takes you right through from ideation to creating a business plan, to help you into execution and to create a business model around it. So it's an ecosystem which has now completely been enabled. The work is always going on to make it better. But that is what Invest India essentially does. Our entire objective is to serve the Prime Minister's objective and this government's objective, which is to make India the most preferred investment destination in the world. And let me, before you ask me a question, Chetan, let me just say what happened last year in the midst of the lockdown. India was the only country which moved up its global ranking as an FDI nation from number 8 to number 5.
Right.
And as I said, the story has only just begun.
The story has just begun. Quickly, how do you, are there any consultations with the government or at the top level to further enhance the ease of doing business for the startup culture?
Absolutely.
What can we expect next in the times to come, like in the next 2-3 months? Is there any policy that can probably come and give benefit to the startup ventures?
See, one of the most critical elements of the success of the startup movement in India has been the ability to create a policy with stakeholder involvement in it. In fact, at every point of time and continuously, there is intensive stakeholder feedback being sought. And that is going back into policy formulation or revision just to keep up with the times and the requirements of the ecosystem and the stakeholders to make it happening fast. So you're seeing a number of these changes happening, starting from market access ability, to getting them technology, to getting them financing, to make it easier for them to start their businesses, to show them the opportunities which are out there, all right through. That is where you're seeing it becoming easier by the day.
Well, as you point out, the opportunities, the ecosystem has just begun to grow, and I think it would eventually take it to greater heights. Thank you, Mr. Bagla, for joining us at Business Today TV. Well, that was Mr. Bagla talking about how the government is proactively working on making the entrepreneurs, especially at the lower level, to solve bigger problems. Thank you so much for watching.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.